The first sensation Cashin remembered was the smell. Not blood, though that came later, drifting like rusted incense from distant corridors, but the deeper scent beneath it, an ancient and almost living musk that clung to the stones under the Colosseum like old breath trapped for centuries. It was damp, mineral-heavy, and strangely warm, as if the earth itself exhaled slowly in the dark. The air felt thick enough to touch, to mold with his fingers, to knead like clay. It filled his lungs in a way that made him wonder if he would ever breathe clean air again. He followed the other recruits down the torchlit steps, each footstep echoing in the narrow stairwell. The descent was long, longer than any structure he had known above ground could possibly allow. Rome built monuments that reached toward the sun, but this passage felt like a monument built downward, burrowing towards something the city preferred not to acknowledge. The torch smoke curled like serpents along the walls, illuminating lines of ancient carvings etched faintly into the stone. They were weathered by time and hands and the scraping of armor, but unmistakably deliberate. Twisting shapes, looping runes, coiling patterns like spirals of bone. No one spoke. Not the recruits. Not the guards shepherding them downward with a dull scrape of spears against the walls. Not even the slaves carrying the oil lamps shaped like grotesque animal faces. There was silence. An expectant heavy silence, as if speech violated some law of gravity here. Cashin reached the bottom step and paused. The others, already stepping into the wide hollow beneath the arena, did not. A hand shoved him lightly between the shoulders. "Move," a guard muttered, not unkindly, just firmly, like a shepherd guiding an animal. Cashin obeyed. The chamber opened before him like the throat of a massive cave. The ceiling arched high overhead, lost in shadow despite the network of torches embedded into the stone pillars. Tunnels branched off in every direction like veins, and from some of them came the distant clanking of chains, the low hum of chanting, the rumble of something heavy being dragged. And beneath it all, that scent, the warm, earthen musk, mingled with smoke and metallic sting of blood. The recruits gathered near a raised platform carved directly into the stone floor. It had no adornments beyond shallow grooves that ran along its sides, grooves that formed interlocking shapes Cashin could not decipher. They seemed almost to shift subtly in the flickering light, though he told himself it was only the shadows playing tricks. Across the chamber, lounging on stone benches or sitting cross-legged near the fire pits, were the men they would soon join, the gladiators. Their bodies were marked, some with scars, some with ritual ink, some with intricate brands burned into their shoulders or across their ribs. Cashin could not yet tell which marks came from battle and which from the mysterious rites whispered about in Rome's taverns. But all of them watched the recruits the same way, silently, intensely, like wolves studying new additions to pack. One of the older gladiators rose. His hair was shaved close except for a braided strip running down the center of his skull. His muscles seemed carved from dark stone, and his eyes, black, unblinking, held the room with quiet authority. He approached the platform without hurry, his bare feet whispering against the sand-dusted floor. No one spoke his name, but Cashin sensed everyone knew it. The chamber itself seemed aware of him. When he finally addressed the recruits, his voice was low, but carried effortlessly. "Welcome," he said. "To those above, you are new slaves of the arena. To those below," his gaze swept across the gathered gladiators, "you are novices of the Order." Cashin felt a prickle at the base of his spine. The Order. He had heard that name only twice in his life, both whispered drunkenly by men who later denied ever speaking it. "You stand beneath Rome's grandest spectacle," the elder continued. "The crowd roars above your heads, praising gods they do not understand. They think bloodshed alone feeds the sand." He leaned forward slightly. "They are wrong." A faint whisper rippled through the chamber. It was not speech, but something like breath traveling across many mouths at once, a sound that made Cashin's skin tighten. The elder nodded toward one of the corridors branching into darkness. From it emerged two more gladiators, each carrying a ceremonial staff topped with rings of bone. Animal bone, Cashin hoped. They circled the recruits, the bones rattling softly like teeth chattering in the cold. "Here," the elder said, "you will shed not only blood, but self. You will learn what lies beneath the surface of strength, beneath the arena, beneath Rome." His voice dropped lower. beneath your own skin. The torches dimmed. Cashin swore it happened of their own accord, and a low chanting began in the far corridor. It was rhythmic, almost melodic, but with no clear beginning or end. The sound wound to the tunnels like a living thing, pulsing, breathing, drawing closer. Cashin felt the others shift uneasily. He sensed the tension radiating off them as they listened to the approaching voices. The chanting was neither Latin nor Greek, nor any language Cashin recognized. It felt older, rougher, carved from the root of something primal and half-forgotten. Torches flared once more, illuminating a procession of masked figures stepping into the chamber. There were 6 of them, dressed in coarse linen robes stained with ash. Their masks were carved from dark wood, polished smooth by time, each shaped into a different face: a snarling beast, a hollow-eyed elder, a horned spirit, a blank faceless visage. The carved mouths were slightly open, as though exhaling some invisible mist. The masks made Cashin's heart thud heavily. He knew Rome kept many cults, but this had the air of something Rome had not sanctioned, something it tolerated only because the gladiators were too valuable to interfere with. The masked figure circled the platform and began tracing lines in the sand with long, narrow sticks. Each line intersected another, creating a web symbol Cashin didn't recognize, but whose symmetry made him uneasy. The elder addressed the recruits again. From this moment, you are bound to the rites of the Ludus Umbra, the school of shadows. The surface world knows nothing of it. Speak of it above ground, and you cease to belong to the living. Cashin noticed that none of the older gladiators flinched or shifted. They accepted these words as casually as breathing, as if living under such rules had long ago become natural. Step forward, the elder commanded. The first recruit, a stocky man from the northern provinces, obeyed. Cashin could see the tremor in his hands, though his face remained stoic. He stepped onto the platform, and the masked figures closed in, their staffs forming a circle around him. They began chanting again, softer this time, almost hypnotic. The sound vibrated faintly through the air. Cashin felt in his chest, like a second heartbeat trying to align with his own. The elder dipped his fingers into a bowl held by a nearby slave. Its contents were thick and dark, and drew a line across the man's forehead. The recruit shuddered. The elder murmured a phrase too quiet to hear. Then, in a single swift motion, one of the robed figures pressed a heated brand against the man's shoulder. He gritted his teeth, stifling a cry. The scent of burning flesh mingled with the ever-present musk. Cashin inhaled sharply. It was not the pain itself that unsettled him, but the ritual surrounding it, the solemnity, the chanting, the eerie calm of which the gladiators observed. The elder released the man. He stepped down from the platform, his face pale, but he walked steadily. One by one, the recruits stepped forward. Each endured the same marking, the same whispered words, the same strange vibration in the air. Cashin watched, his pulse quickening with each passing moment. By the time his turn came, his palms were damp and cool. He stepped onto the platform. The sand felt unexpectedly warm beneath his feet. The torchlit chamber seemed to close around him, as if the darkness had drawn closer. The masked figures encircled him. He could hear their breath behind the wooden faces, slow, synchronized, ritualistic. One of them held a bowl of smoldering herbs, releasing fragrant smoke that curled around Cashin's torso like searching fingers. The scent was overpowering, heavy with something sweet and metallic. The elder approached. His eyes held no malice, no pity, only expectation. Cashin forced himself to stand still as the elder dipped his fingers into the dark substance. When the cold streak touched Cashin's skin, he felt an almost electric sting. The elder drew a sigil across his forehead, swift and sure. "Cashin," the elder said, his voice subtly intimate, quieter than before. "Son of no noble house, bearer of no legacy, do you come willingly into the shadow of the arena?" Cashin hesitated. The chanting rose slightly, as though urging him. "I come," he said. "Do you give your blood to the sand, your strength to the brotherhood, your name to the order?" "I do." The elder studied him for a heartbeat, then stepped aside. One of the masked figures extended the brand toward him. The metal glowed a dull, angry red. Cashin braced himself. The brand touched the skin. The pain was immediate, sharp, scorching, but something strange happened beneath it. The chanting swelled, the torches flickered, and for a fleeting moment Cashin felt weightless, as though the world around him had been pulled away. He saw, no, sensed, shapes moving in the darkness beyond the chamber walls. Not physical shapes, but impressions, tall, spiraling forms, half-human silhouettes, eyes that glimmer without light. The sensation vanished as the brand lifted. Cashin gasped softly, not from the pain, but from the strange aftershock vibrating through him. He stepped off the platform, unsteady but upright. The other recruits watched him with different expressions: fear, respect, curiosity. The gladiators observed with silent approval. The elder raised his arms, and the chamber quieted instantly. "It is done," he said. "You bear the mark of the Umbra. From this night onward, you walk the path beneath the sand." A low hum rose from the gathered gladiators. Not applause, not cheering, but a resonant acknowledgement, like a distant storm echoing through deep caverns. The torches flared, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. For a moment Cashin thought the carved symbols on the pillars shifted again, almost as if reacting to the ritual. The elder gestured to the far corridor. "Follow. Your quarters await." The recruits obeyed, moving in a line through the torchlit passage. Cashin glanced back once more at the central chamber. The masked figures were erasing the sigils in the sand, sweeping them away with slow, ceremonial strokes. The gladiators dispersed into various tunnels, speaking quietly now that the ceremony had ended. As Cashin walked, the corridor narrowed. The sound of chanting faded, replaced by the distant rumble of machinery. The wooden lifts that hauled beasts and fighters into the arena above. The walls here were closer, the air warmer. Rows of iron sconces cast wavering light across etched murals depicting gladiators locked in combat, their faces twisted not in battle rage, but in ritual trance. One mural showed a figure kneeling while another placed a hand on his head. Another showed a circle of fighters standing around a central pit. None showed gods, emperors, or victories. Only rites. "Keep moving," a guard said behind them. They reached a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. A gladiator stationed outside, broad-shouldered, scarred, his eyes deep-set, pushed it open. The room beyond was long and low-ceilinged, filled with rows of simple beds lined with woven blankets. Clay oil lamps hung from hooks, casting a muted amber glow. "This is where you sleep?" the gladiator said. "If sleep finds you." He smirked faintly, though without humor. Cashin felt the weight of the brand on his shoulder, throbbing in time with his heartbeat. As the recruits found their beds, whispers rose softly. Cashin sat on the edge of his, running his fingers over the coarse blanket. He tried not to think of the strange vision he glimpsed during the branding, but the memory lingered like a stubborn ember. The marked shoulder burned, and he could still feel the chanting echoing subtly beneath his ribs. A voice spoke beside him. "You saw something, didn't you?" Cashin turned. A young man with sharp features and a shaved head sat on the neighboring bed. His eyes were alert, watchful. "You?" Cashin asked. The young man nodded once. "They say it happens to some. Not all." Cashin exhaled. "What did you see?" The young man looked away. "Shadows, moving toward me like they knew me." Cashin swallowed. "I sensed something too." The young man offered a faint, grim smile. "Then perhaps we're not the only ones the Order is watching." Before Cashin could respond, the elder gladiator from the ceremony entered the room. The conversation died instantly. The elder scanned recruits, his gaze sharp even in the dim light. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow you begin your training. And your lessons." He lingered a moment longer, then turned to leave. The door closed behind him with a dull echo. Cashin lay back on the thin mattress. The air was still heavy with smoke and sweat and earth, but he found himself growing accustomed to it. His body was tired, but his mind churned. Somewhere beyond the room, deeper in the tunnels, chanting began again, soft, rhythmic, almost soothing. A lullaby of shadows. Cashin closed his eyes, and under the sand, the dark breathed with him. The morning began in darkness, deeper than the night before, deeper than any Cashin had known above the earth. Down here, the sun was a rumor, a distant myth prized only by those who have forgotten the weight of stone ceilings. The air was cool, heavy, and dense with the lingering fragrance of last night's incense. Cashin woke to the sound of footsteps echoing through the corridor, steady and rhythmic. It was not the hurried stomp of guards or the idle shuffle of slaves. It was deliberate, ceremonial. Every recruit in the room stirred awake as if pulled by an invisible string. A faint haze of smoke drifted under the door. Then the door opened. 3 masked figures entered, different masks from the night before. These were bone white, carved with lines that resembled veins or cracks. Thin slits allowed narrow glimpses of shadowed eyes beneath. The robed figures carried torches scented with bitter herbs, filling the room with sharp, almost intoxicating aroma. "Up," one said. His voice was distorted by the mask, layered, almost echoing. The recruits obeyed immediately, rising from their beds. Cashin felt the ache in his marked shoulder pulse faintly, as if recognizing the presence of the ritual figures. The bone-masked man stepped closer to Cashin and lifted his chin slightly, examining the sigil burned into his skin. The gesture was not forceful, but it carried a quiet authority that made Cashin's breath tighten. "Good," the figure murmured. "It holds." Cashin did not know what that meant. He was not sure he wanted to. The recruits were ordered into a single file line. The masked figure surrounded them, guiding them through a narrow corridor lit only by low-burning lamps. The walls here were lined with hanging strips of faded cloth etched with runes Cashin didn't recognize. Some were stained dark. Others had threads woven in gold patterns that glimmered faintly. They passed a threshold marked by 2 carved pillars. The temperature shifted instantly, the air warmer, thicker, humming with low vibration that Cashin felt in his bones. The corridor opened into a massive chamber. Cashin had seen the ritual space beneath the arena the night before, but this chamber dwarfed it. The ceiling rose in a vast dome supported by thick, carved columns depicting men and beasts entwined in spiraling shapes. Fire pits glowed along the perimeter, filling the space with a dim amber haze. In the center of the chamber sat a large circular pit filled with sand. The sand was darker than the arenas, almost black like powdered obsidian. Torches encircled the pit, each flame flickering in a different hue, some red, some blue, some a sickly green. The colors cast shifting shadows that danced across the walls like restless spirits. Dozens of gladiators stood at the edges of the chamber. Their bodies were bare except for leather belts and straps wrapped across their torsos. Their skin was painted with ochre symbols, spirals, lines, and marks that looked as though they were copied from the ancient carvings on the pillars. Some marks glowed faintly in the firelight. Cashin felt an involuntary shiver crawl up his spine. At the far side of the chamber stood the elder from the night before. Today he wore a mantle of dark feathers draped over his shoulders, and a thin ring of black metal circled his throat. He lifted his hand, and the chanting began. It was softer than the previous night, but more intricate, layered voices weaving through each other in a slow, rhythmic cadence. The sound filled the chamber until Cashin could no longer tell which voices belonged to living men and which to echoes carved into the stones. "Novices," the elder said when the chanting settled to an undercurrent. "You have been marked with the sigil of the Umbra." That was but the first step. He gestured to the dark sanded pit. "Today, you are bound not only to the order, but to the blood lineage, the chain of gladiators stretching back to the earliest shadows of the Republic. You will receive the mark of initiation and be baptized into the rites that feed the arena." Step forward. The recruits moved as one, though hesitation lingered in their steps. Cashin felt the pressure of dozens of gladiator eyes on his back as he approached the pit. The closer he came to it, the stronger the scent of strange herbs, dust, and heat became. The surface of sand seemed to ripple as if breathing. The elder extended his arms. "Begin!" The masked figure stepped forward, each carrying an object wrapped in crimson cloth. One by one, they unveiled the ritual instruments. The first object was a long bronze blade, not sharp enough for combat, but heavy and engraved with curling symbols. The second was a bowl filled with dark liquid. It shimmered thickly in the torchlight, neither water nor wine, smelling faintly of iron and herbs. The third was a chain of interlocking rings, each ring made of a different metal, bronze, iron, silver, and one dark material Cassian couldn't identify. The recruit stood in a semicircle around the pit. The masked figures traced lines in the sand with a bronze blade, creating a massive symbol that spanned most of the circle. Cassian watched the pattern form, a six-pointed wheel intersected by spirals and surrounded by what looked like teeth. When the symbol was complete, the chanting grew louder. The elder's voice cut through it. "Stripped to your waists." Cassian hesitated only a moment before pulling off his tunic. The air felt warmer against his skin, charged with the heat of the fire pits. The brand on his shoulder throbbed, as though sensing what was coming. The masked figures approached, each holding a small bowl of ash-black powder. They dipped their fingers into the powder and began tracing lines across the recruits' torsos, arms, and backs. The powder clung to the skin like fine soot, cool at first, then warming strangely. Cassian breathed in the thick, incense-laden air. The mixture of heat, smoke, and silence settled over him like a mantle. When the markings were complete, the elder spoke again. "You will enter the pit one by one. You will stand upon the symbol. You will speak the words of the oath, and you will receive the mark of initiation. There is no turning back once you step inside." Cassian's pulse quickened. The others shifted beside him, some swallowing nervously, others lifting their chins with forced resolve. First, the elder called Lucian. The shaved-headed young man Cassian had spoken to the knight before stepped forward. His jaw was tight, eyes fixed straight ahead. He entered the pit, his feet sinking slightly into the warm sand. He stood on the center of the symbol. The chanting intensified. The elder lifted the chain of interlocking rings and draped it around Lucian's neck. The chain clinked softly, each ring giving off a dull glow. "Speak," the elder commanded. Lucian recited the oath, his voice trembling at first, then strengthening. "I give my breath to the shadows, my strength to brotherhood, my name to the lineage, my body to the rites, and my blood to the sand that binds us." The elder nodded. Two masked figures stepped forward, holding the bowl of dark liquid. They dipped the bronze blade into it, coating the metal with the shimmering substance. Then, with slow ceremonial precision, they pressed the flat of the blade against Lucian's chest. Lucian inhaled sharply. The substance sizzled faintly, leaving behind a dark sigil across his sternum, the mark of initiation, a symbol older than Rome itself. Cassian watched Lucian step out of the pit, his face pale but resolute. The chain around his neck glowed briefly before fading to dull metal. "Next," the elder said. "Cassian." Cassian took a breath and stepped forward. The sand was warm, almost soft beneath his feet. The symbol drawn beneath him felt alive, like the lines pulsed with subtle heat. As he reached the center, the chanting deepened into a low drone that vibrated through the floor. The elder approached, holding the chain. He placed it around Cassian's neck. The weight surprised him, not heavy, but grounding, as if anchoring him to something beyond himself. "Speak the oath." Cassian swallowed and spoke the ancient words. His voice sounded different in the chamber, hollow yet resonant, as though the walls themselves carried the sound deeper into the darkness below. When he finished, the masked figure stepped forward with a bowl of dark liquid. Cassian watched the blade dip into it. The air thickened, the torches flickering with green flames. The blade pressed against his chest. The cold metal shocked him, and then the heat bloomed across his skin. The sensation was neither pain nor comfort, but something between, a deep, inward pressure that felt as though the mark was being carved into something beneath the flesh. He inhaled sharply. For an instant, light flickered in the corners of his vision. He glimpsed faint shapes, faces, perhaps, watching him from the darkness beyond the torches. Then the blade lifted. The sigil burned faintly on his chest, its lines dark and glossy. Cassian stepped out of the pit, muscles trembling, though he wasn't sure it was from fear or a strange exhilaration. The chain around his neck warmed briefly, then cooled. The ritual continued. Each recruit entered the pit, spoke the oath, and received the mark. Some staggered afterward, others walked steadily. One boy collapsed on his knees after the blade touched his skin. The masked figures lifted him silently, placing him on a bench along the wall. His chest rose and fell rapidly, but he lived. When the last recruit finished, The chanting shifted into a different rhythm, faster, more fervent. The gladiators around the chamber raised their arms, palms outward. The torches flared, casting long shadows that spread across the sand. The elder stepped into the center of the pit. "You are now children of the lineage," he intoned. "Blood-bound, bone-bound, shadow-bound. The arena above may claim your bodies, but the rites below claim your spirits." He traced a circle in the air with his finger. "From this day, you fight not alone, but as part of the chain that stretches through centuries. The mark of initiation binds you to every gladiator who came before, and every one who will come after." He lowered his hand. "You will sleep differently now, dream differently, breathe differently. The rites will call to you, and you will answer." The chanting ceased abruptly. Silence fell, heavy, dense, absolute. The elder spoke the final words of the ceremony. "Welcome to the blood lineage." The torches extinguished instantly. Darkness swallowed the chamber. A collective breath rose from the recruits, though no one made a sound. The darkness was complete. Thick as cloth, warm as breath. Cashin felt his heart beating in his throat. Then a single torch flared to life at the far end of the chamber. Its green flame illuminated the elder's face. "You are dismissed." The gladiators withdrew into the shadows. The masked figures vanished into unseen passageways. The recruits were guided out through a side corridor lit by dim lamps. Cashin walked with the others, the new sigil on his chest throbbing in rhythm with his heartbeat. The chain around his neck felt heavier now, as though absorbing something from the earth. Lucian walked beside him, silent for a long time. Finally he spoke. "What did you feel?" he asked. Cashin hesitated. "Pressure, heat, and something watching." Lucian nodded slowly. "Me too." They continued down the corridor. The stones hummed faintly beneath their feet. Cashin touched the sigil on his chest. It was warm, warmer than his skin. He wondered if the feeling would fade. He suspected it would not. They reached the living quarters. The room was unchanged, yet it felt different. Smaller, closer, as though the shadows in the corners had grown thicker. Cashin lay on his bed. The incense lingered on his skin. His chest thrummed with the weight of the new mark. He felt tethered, bound, to something he could not name. When he closed his eyes, he saw a shape spiraling behind his eyelids. Faces without features. Eyes without bodies. Symbols glowing faintly like embers in the dark. The initiation had changed him. And deep beneath the Colosseum, something ancient had taken notice. The days after the initiation unfolded in a rhythm that felt both relentless and strangely hypnotic. Cashin soon learned that time beneath the Colosseum was measured differently. There were no sunrises, no sunsets, only the cycle of torches burning low, being replaced, and burning again. He woke when the elders commanded, trained until his muscles trembled, and rested in the narrow hours dictated by the order. His sense of day and night blurred into something fluid, as though time itself obeyed the rites of the Brotherhood more than the movements of the world above. On the third morning after the mark of initiation, Cashin followed the other recruits into the main training cavern. It was vast, circular, with shallow layers of sand covering the stone floor. Oil lamps were positioned at regular intervals along the walls, their flames swaying in the draft like restless spirits suspended in amber glass. In the center of the cavern stood a ring of 12 gladiators, veterans, each wearing ritual paint across their bare chests. Some had white spirals curling around their arms. Others bore jagged symbols like claws stretching across their ribs. All stood still, their gazes fixed on the recruits as they entered. Lucian walked beside Cashin, silent but alert. His shaved head gleamed faintly under flickering lamplight, and the sigil on his chest, dark, glossy, seemed to pulse with each breath. "What do you think they're going to do today?" Lucian murmured, his voice low enough to blend with the hum of the torches. Cashin shook his head. "Something worse than yesterday." Lucian gave a quiet, humorless snort. "That's a safe assumption." The recruits took their places at the edge of the arena. The elder who had overseen their initiation, Vero, as Cashin had learned, stepped forward from the circle of veterans. Today he wore no feathered mantle, only a simple leather harness strapped diagonally across his chest, leaving his arms and shoulders bare. Even stripped of ceremonial dress, His presence dominated the cavern. His gaze moved over the recruits like a weight. "You have taken the first step," Vero began, his voice resonating easily off the stone walls. "You've been marked. You belong to the blood lineage. But the lineage is more than ritual. It is practice, discipline, unity." He gestured to the veterans. "These are your brothers. They will shape you, break you, remake you." Cassian felt Lucian shift slightly beside him. A tall veteran stepped forward, his abdomen and arms laced with scars that formed a pattern resembling a spider's web. His face was severe but focused, carved in angles and shadows. "I am Marcellus," he said, "first blade of the Brotherhood. I will teach you the foundations of shadow combat." Another veteran, broad-shouldered with a jagged crescent-shaped mark across his neck, stepped forward. "I am Drasus, shield bearer. I will teach you the rites of endurance." One by one, the veterans introduced themselves. Some spoke only their name. Others added brief descriptions of their roles in the order: Spear Master, Ritual Binder, Night Runner, Bone Reader. Cassian couldn't discern which titles were literal and which were symbolic. Perhaps all were both. When the introductions ended, Vero raised his arm. "Step forward, recruits." Cassian and the others moved into the training circle. The veterans spread out, encircling them. Cassian felt a shift in the air, an unspoken tension, heavy and expectant. Vero spoke again. "The Brotherhood is built on hierarchy. But hierarchies are not given. They are earned. Strength, discipline, resolve, these define your place." He lowered his hand, and the air seemed to still. "Your training begins now." The veterans closed in. It was not a sparring match. It was a test, subtle, ritualistic, brutal in a way that carried meaning beyond strikes and parries. Marcellus approached Cassian first. He held 2 wooden practice blades, offering one to Cassian without a word. Cassian took it, feeling the grainy texture press against his palm. "Stance," Marcellus commanded. Cassian positioned his feet as he'd been taught above ground, but Marcellus shook his head. "No, that stance belongs to Roman soldiers. Here, we fight as shadows, not legionaries." He moved behind Cassian, adjusting his footing by nudging his ankles into a wider position. His presence loomed close, silent, instructive, intense in a way that felt almost ritualistic. Cassian could feel the heat radiating from the veteran's body, the steadiness of his breath. Marcellus placed 2 fingers lightly against Cassian's lower back. "Lower your center. The arena sand shifts. You must shift with it." Cassian complied. Marcellus circled him, now gripped the weapon. Cassian tightened his hold. Marcellus struck the blade from his hand in a single motion. "Wrong," he said. Cassian blinked, stunned. Lucian glanced over with a grim smile, as if to say, "Welcome to the Brotherhood." Marcellus retrieved the blade and placed it back in Cassian's hand. "Again." Cassian adjusted his grip. Marcellus knocked the blade away a second time, and a third. It took Cassian 7 attempts before Marcellus finally grunted in approval. Nearby, Drasus led another group of recruits through endurance drills that seemed closer to ritual trials than physical training. He made them carry weighted stones carved with ancient symbols, stones shaped like broken circles, crescents, and spirals. The recruits hoisted them over their heads and walked the perimeter of the cavern. When they faltered, Drasus struck the sand with a wooden staff, releasing a puff of dust around their feet. "Again," he commanded. Lucian was among them, his jaw clenched, arms trembling under the weight, but he refused to drop the stone. Cassian continued his training, sweat dripping from his brow. Marcellus moved with fluid precision, his body seemingly immune to exhaustion. Cassian found his own movements gradually aligning with the veteran's instruction, as though the techniques were being etched into his muscles through repetition and proximity. The hours passed in a blur of drills, corrections, and silent observation. Cassian learned quickly that the veterans rarely praised, but when they did, when Marcellus murmured good, or Drasus gave a curt nod, it carried weight enough to steady a man's resolve. But the Brotherhood was not built solely on discipline. It was built on unity. After the drills ended, Vero signaled for silence. The recruits halted, chests heaving, bodies slick with sweat. The veterans formed a circle around them. "You fought well," Vero said. But battle is only part of what binds you. Shadows do not survive alone. You must know each other, trust each other, stand with each other. He pointed toward a cluster of stone benches near the cavern wall. Sit. The recruits obeyed. The veterans joined them, sitting among them instead of apart. Cassian found himself between Marcellus and a veteran named Helvius, a wiry man with ritual tattoos down his spine. Vero walked among them. Every brother here has shed blood for the man beside him. Every brother has bled with honor, fear, rage, and survived. You will do the same. He paused, hand resting briefly on Marcellus's shoulder. Before you fight together, you will speak together. Recruits, look to the man closest to you. Cassian turned to Lucian, who sat 2 places to his right. Lucian's eyes were sharp, attentive. Speak your truth, Vero said. Who were you before the order claimed you? A silence settled before one recruit, a broad-shouldered Gaul, spoke first. I was a miner. My village was taken by tax collectors. I fought back. I lost. A veteran nodded approvingly. Another recruit followed. I was a thief in the Sabura, caught stealing from the wrong man. One by one, the stories emerged, some simple, some tragic, some spoken with clenched jaws. Cassian listened, learning the fractures and strengths of those around him. When it was his turn, he hesitated only briefly. I was a farmer's son, he said. I fought in the auxiliary. When my unit was ambushed, I survived. Others didn't. They blamed me. So here I am. Lucian spoke after him. I fought for coin, lost more than I earned. A debt landed me here. Vero nodded. Good. Truth forms a foundation of unity. Helvius, sitting beside Cassian, leaned forward slightly. Now listen, he said. Listen to how you all speak. Each of you lost something. Family, freedom, honor. But here in the shadows, loss becomes strength. Marcellus added quietly. Here, no one fights alone. The rights bind you tighter than blood. Cassian absorbed their words. He sensed a truth in them, not a sentimental truth, but a hard, pragmatic one. Down here, bonds mattered. Without them, a man would be swallowed by the darkness. After the stories ended, Vero lifted a hand, signaling the next phase. The veterans retrieved small clay cups from a nearby alcove. Each cup contained a dark herbal mixture that smelled bitter and metallic. This is the drink of the Brotherhood, Vero said. It clears the mind, sharpens the breath, opens the senses. Cassian took the cup offered to him. Lucian did the same. The veterans drank with them. The liquid was thick and pungent. It clung to Cassian's tongue like earth mixed with smoke. A warmth spread through his chest, radiating outward. When all had swallowed, the veterans rose. Marcellus spoke. Now begins the second stage of unity. Drasus smashed his staff against the floor. The torches dimmed. The veterans began chanting, low, rhythmic, in the same ancient language Cassian had heard before. The sound filled the cavern like a tremor, vibrating to the floor and rising into the air. Cassian felt the warmth in his chest intensify. His senses sharpened. The shadows seemed to shift at the edges of his vision, curling like fingers. Marcellus placed a hand on Cassian's shoulder. Steady, he murmured. The chant grew louder. The veterans stood behind each recruit, hands on their shoulders, forming 2 interlocking circles, one of novices, one of mentors. The formation felt ritualistic, deliberate. Vero stepped into the center of the circle and raised a stone bowl filled with smoldering herbs. The smoke curled outward, thick and fragrant, swirling through the cavern. Breathe, Vero commanded. Cassian inhaled. The smoke wound through his lungs like a thread. His heartbeat slowed, deepened. The veterans exhaled in unison. The recruits followed. The sense of separation between bodies loosened. Breath aligned. Heartbeats matched. For a moment, Cassian felt connected, not merely standing near the others, but tethered to them, as though the air between them had fused. Vero lowered the bowl. The Brotherhood is not built by force, he said. It is built by breath, by unity. Marcellus squeezed Cassian's shoulder once, firmly. Lucian received the same gesture from Drasus. Then the chant stopped. Silence fell, heavy, intimate, absolute. Vero finally spoke the words that ended the rite. "You are bound." The torches brightened. The veteran stepped away. Cashin felt a sudden absence, like the release of tension from a drawn bowstring. But something remained, an afterglow, a resonance. Lucian met his eyes. They nodded once to each other. The training ended. But the day had not. That evening, long after the drills and the unity rite, Vero gathered the recruits again. The cavern was lit by only a handful of torches now, their flames small and watchful. "You have taken another step," Vero said, "but the path is long. In 3 days, you will face your first ritual trial." The recruit stiffened. Cashin felt a chill slip down his spine. "It will test your endurance, your loyalty, and your place within the Brotherhood." Vero continued. "Some fail, some fall." He did not elaborate. Lucian whispered, "What kind of trial?" A veteran answered quietly from behind them, "One that reveals who you really are." The tension thickened like smoke. Vero dismissed them, but Cashin could not shake the weight of the coming trial. He lay awake in the dim quarters long after the others drifted into uneasy sleep, the sigil on his chest pulsing faintly. He was part of the Brotherhood now, bound to them in breath, in rite, in shadow. But the trial would decide if that bond would hold or break. The night of embers arrived without announcement. Cashin sensed it first in the air. The torches burned lower than usual, their flames steady but subdued, as if conserving themselves for something yet to come. The stone beneath his bare feet felt warmer, almost pulsing faintly, like a living thing preparing to wake. Even the distant machinery of the arena above seemed quieter, the groan of lifts and chains muted, respectful. No horn sounded. No command echoed through the corridors. Instead, the chanting began. It seeped through the tunnels like smoke, low and rhythmic, rising and falling with the cadence of breath. Cashin lay awake on a pallet, eyes open, chest rising in time with the sound. Around him, the other initiates stirred, some sitting up slowly, others already standing as though summoned from sleep by instinct rather than sound. Lucian met Cashin's gaze across the room. Neither spoke. They did not need to. The Night of Embers had been whispered about since their initiation. Spoken of carefully, never described directly. A rite performed only before the greatest games, when the arena above would soon drink deeply. A ceremony meant not for crowd, but for what lingered beneath the sand. The door opened. Masked priests entered silently, their forms draped in robes the color of ash and cinder. Unlike the bone and wood masks of previous rites, these were wrought from darkened bronze, polished until they reflected the torchlight in distorted glimmers. Each mask bore a single elongated eye carved deep into the metal, hollow and staring. One priest raised a hand. "Come," he said. His voice was layered, resonant, as if more than one throat spoke through the mask. The initiates rose and followed. They moved through corridors Cashin had never seen before. Older passages, narrower, their walls etched with symbols worn nearly smooth by time. The chanting grew louder with every step, no longer distant but immediate, vibrating through Cashin's ribs. The air grew thick with incense, heavy and sweet, tinged with bitterness that settled on the tongue. They passed beneath an arch carved with figures locked in ritual poses, bodies curved inward, faces lifted in expressions Cashin could not decipher. Reverence, perhaps, or surrender. The corridor opened into a vast subterranean chamber unlike any Cashin had yet seen. The ceiling rose high and open, split by a circular aperture far above. Moonlight poured down through it in a pale shaft, illuminating the center of the chamber like a divine wound in the darkness. Fine ash drifted lazily through the beam, glowing softly as it fell. At the heart of the chamber stood a massive iron brazier, filled with smoldering embers. The coals glowed deep red, breathing slowly, releasing waves of heat that rolled across the stone floor. Around it, arranged in concentric circles, stood the gladiators of the Brotherhood, veterans and initiate alike, barefoot, stripped to ritual harnesses and painted markings. Cashin's chest tightened. The sigil burned into his skin glimmered faintly in the moonlight, responding to the presence of the embers. Around him, the other initiates bore the same reaction. Mark's glowing, breath slowing, eyes unfocused. The priests moved to the edges of the chamber, forming a ring beyond the gladiators. Each carried a staff topped with a small cage of burning resin, releasing twisting streams of fragrant smoke. Vero stood near the brazier. Tonight, his appearance was transformed. His skin was painted with black and red pigments in spiraling patterns that traced his musculature. Around his neck hung a collar of interlinked iron plates etched with symbols Cassian recognized from the initiation pit. His eyes gleamed with reflected firelight. "The Night of Embers," Vero said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. The threshold between breath and shadow. The chanting shifted, deepening, voices layering over one another in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. "You stand beneath the open sky," Vero continued, gesturing upward toward the moonlit aperture. "The moon watches, the sand above waits, and the old witnesses stir." Cassian felt a tremor ripple through the chamber. Not an earthquake, but a subtle vibration, like the echo of distant movement deep within the stone. Vero raised his hands, formed a spiral. The gladiators moved without hesitation. Veterans guided initiates gently but firmly, placing hands at shoulders, backs, wrists, contact purposeful, grounding. Cassian felt Marcellus's hand press briefly between his shoulder blades, steering him into position. The touch was steady, anchoring, carrying an unspoken command. Breathe. They formed a great spiral around the brazier, bodies close enough that Cassian could feel the heat radiating from those beside him. Breath mingled with breath. Sweat gleamed in the firelight. The air vibrated with chanting. The priests circled the outer ring, swinging their incense cages slowly. Smoke drifted inward, curling around the spiral, wrapping the gladiators in a fragrant haze that blurred edges and softened thought. Cassian inhaled. The scent was intoxicating. Resin, ash, something floral and something metallic. His senses sharpened even as his thoughts loosened. The chamber seemed to tilt slightly, the embers pulsing brighter, then dimmer, in time with his heartbeat. "Lower your gaze," Vero commanded. Cassian obeyed, eyes dropping to the stone floor. The carvings beneath his feet seemed to shift subtly, lines flowing into one another, forming shapes that felt familiar despite his inability to name them. "Breathe together," Vero said. The chanting slowed, spacing itself between breaths. "Inhale. Exhale." Cassian felt the spiral tighten as bodies leaned inward, shoulders brushing, arms grazing skin. The proximity was intense but controlled, ritualized rather than chaotic. He was acutely aware of the warmth of Lucian's arm near his own, the steady rhythm of Marcellus's breath behind him. "Inhale. Exhale." The priest began to hum beneath the chanting, a low harmonic that resonated in Cassian's chest. The embers flared, sending sparks upward that vanished into the moonlight. Vero stepped closer to the brazier. He lifted a long iron rod from beside it, its tip glowing faintly. "The embers remember," he intoned. "They remember every drop of blood spilled in the sand, every breath drawn in the moment between life and death." Cassian's vision blurred at the edges. The chamber felt larger and smaller at once, the moonlight stretching, contracting. "Tonight," Vero continued, "you will listen." The chanting rose. The priests began to trace symbols in the air with their staffs, each movement slow and deliberate. As they did, Cassian felt a pressure building behind his eyes, not painful but insistent. The heat intensified. Someone near the center of the spiral staggered slightly. Hands steadied him instantly. No one broke formation. Cassian felt his heartbeat slow, deepen. Each pulse sent a wave of warmth through his limbs. The sigil on his chest burned brighter, then cooler as though breathing. The chanting shifted again, faster now, layered with sharp intakes of breath. Cassian's thoughts began to fragment. He saw flashes behind his closed eyes, sand stained dark, hands gripping weapons slick with sweat, faces blurred by motion and shadow. He smelled blood and incense and smoke all at once. Then something else. A presence. It was not a vision exactly, nor a sound. It was a sensation of being observed, not by eyes, but by something vast and patient, pressing gently against the edges of his awareness. Cassian's breath caught. Marcellus's hand tightened briefly at his back, grounding him. "Do not resist," Vero's voice echoed, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "The old witnesses do not take. They observe." Cashin let his breath flow again. The presence did not recede. Instead, it settled, like a weight resting just beyond his skin. He felt it brush against his thoughts, his memories, not probing, simply acknowledging. Around him, the spiral swayed subtly, bodies moving in unison. The boundary between self and other blurred. Cashin could no longer tell where his breath ended and Lucian's began. The embers flared brighter. A priest stepped forward and scattered powdered resin onto the coals. Flames leapt high, bathing the chamber in red-orange light. Shadows twisted across the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost intentional. Figures watching, standing just beyond the ring of light. Cashin's pulse quickened. He saw a face in the fire, not clearly, but enough to sense its age, its familiarity. Not a god, not a man. Something older, something bound to the sand. The chanting reached a crescendo. Vero raised the iron rod and plunged it into the embers. Sparks exploded outward, harmlessly dissipating before reaching the gladiators. "Witness," Vero commanded. Cashin felt a surge of sensation, heat, pressure, clarity. For a heartbeat, the chamber vanished. He stood in an endless arena of shadowed sand. No walls, no sky, just a vast expanse lit by a dim, ember-red glow. Figures stood at the edges, countless, silent, watching. He knew without knowing how that these were the blood lineage. Gladiators who had walked the same rites, breathed the same smoke, spilled their blood into the same sand. They did not speak. They did not judge. They simply observed. Cashin felt no fear, only awareness. Then the vision fractured. The chamber snapped back into place. Cashin staggered slightly, breath ragged. Hands steadied him immediately. Lucian's grip firm at his arm, Marcellus's presence solid behind him. The chanting slowed. The priests withdrew their staffs. Vero lowered the iron rod, its glow fading. "The embers have seen you," he said quietly. "They have marked your breath." The spiral loosened. Gladiators straightened slowly, some blinking as if waking from deep sleep. Others stood motionless, eyes distant. Cashin's chest ached, not with pain, but with a deep, resonant heaviness, as though something had settled into him. Vero raised his voice once more. "Tomorrow, the arena above will roar. The crowd will cheer. They will believe they witnessed death and glory." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But you will know the truth." The priest extinguished the brazier with a scattering of ash. Steam hissed softly, rising in pale tendrils. "The night of embers is complete," Vero said. "Return to your quarters. Keep silence until dawn." The gladiators dispersed slowly, the spiral unraveling. Cashin walked with Lucian and Marcellus through the torchlit corridor, his limbs heavy but steady. Neither spoke until they reached the living quarters. Lucian finally broke the silence. "Did you see something?" Cashin nodded. "I think so." Marcellus glanced at them both. His expression was unreadable. "Good," he said. "That means the embers recognized you." Lucian swallowed. "Is that good?" Marcellus's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "It means you're not invisible." He turned and left them. Cashin lay on his pallet, staring up at the stone ceiling. His body hummed faintly, as though charged with residual heat. When he closed his eyes, he saw embers drifting through darkness. And beyond them, the sense of being watched lingered, not threatening, not comforting. Patient. Above him, Rome slept. Below, the shadows remembered. The revelations began quietly, not with horns or fire or spectacle, but with whispers carried through the stone like veins carrying blood. Cashin noticed in the days following the night of embers, the way veterans spoke more carefully, the way priests lingered longer in shadow corridors, the way certain doors, once merely guarded, were now watched. Something had shifted. The arena above prepared for the great games. Below, the Brotherhood prepared for something far older. Cashin was summoned to the others at what felt like the deepest hour of the subterranean night. The torches guiding them burned with a dull, reddish flame, fed by oils mixed with unfamiliar resins. The air tasted metallic, heavy on the tongue. They were led not to the great ritual chamber, but downward, into passages few gladiators ever walked. The stone here was rougher, older, cut by hands long before Rome's architects imposed their order upon the world. Symbols etched into the walls bore no resemblance to Latin script. They were jagged, spiraling, instinctive. Some had been filled with dark pigment that had seeped into the stone over centuries. Lucian leaned close to Cassian as they walked. "These tunnels," he whispered, "they predate the Colosseum." Cassian nodded. He could feel it. The air itself felt different, less controlled, less disciplined, as if Rome's authority weakened the deeper they went. They reached a vast cavern whose ceiling disappeared into darkness. No moonlight pierced this place. Instead, the chamber was illuminated by dozens of shallow stone bowls filled with slow-burning embers. The light they cast was low and pulsing, turning the walls into living surfaces where shadows writhed and merged. At the far end of the cavern rose a massive stone, relief carved directly into the rock face. Cassian's breath caught. It depicted figures not quite human. Tall, elongated forms with limbs curved unnaturally, faces worn smooth by time. Some bore horns. Others had eyes carved far too large for any mortal skull. Beneath them knelt warriors, bare-chested, marked with sigils, offering up bowls, weapons, and their own blood. Rome had conquered countless tribes, but Rome had not erased their gods. Varro stood before the relief, flanked by the masked priests. Tonight, the masks were different again. These were stone, chipped and cracked, as though excavated from forgotten ruins. The priests' robes were dyed deep black, their hems stiff with dried residue Cassian did not want to identify. "You stand," Varro said, "before the origins of the Brotherhood." The chanting began softly, slower, heavier than before. It resonated through the cavern, like a heartbeat too deep to hear clearly. "Before Rome," Varro continued, "before marble and law and spectacle, this land belonged to tribes whose names are dust. They fought not for empire, but for survival, and they did not fight alone." He gestured toward the relief. They bound themselves to powers born of soil, flame, and blood, powers that demanded no temples, only devotion. Cassian felt a pressure build behind his eyes. The embers flickered, and for a moment the carved figures seemed to lean forward, their shadows stretching across the floor. "When Rome conquered them," Varro said, "it slaughtered their warriors, enslaved their people, and buried their gods." His gaze hardened. But the gods were not destroyed. The chanting deepened. They endured in whispers, in rites passed secretly from captive to captive, from gladiator to gladiator. Cassian's sigil burned faintly. The arena became their altar. The words settled heavily. Varro turned to the initiates. "What you felt on the night of embers was not imagination. The witnesses are real. They are not gods as Rome understands them, but they are older and they remember." The priest stepped forward, carrying long stone tables into the center of the cavern. Each table bore ritual objects, shallow bowls, carved knives, cords woven from dark fibers, and tablets etched with the same jagged symbols carved into the walls. "These are the forbidden ones," Varro said, his voice reverent but controlled. "Their names are not spoken above ground. To Rome, they do not exist." The chanting shifted, voices lowering. "They demand tribute, not in gold, not in temples." Varro's gaze swept over gladiators. "They demand blood freely given." Silence fell. Cassian felt Lucian tense beside him. Varro raised his hand. "Do not mistake this for slaughter. This is covenant. Blood binds because it remembers." The priest began distributing cords to the initiates, dark, coarse, and warm to the touch, as though recently held close to a flame. "Bind your wrists," Varro commanded. Cassian wrapped the cord around his left wrist. Lucian did the same. The fibers pressed against skin firmly, grounding. One of the priests approached Cassian, offering him a ritual knife. The blade was obsidian black, its edge catching the ember light with a dull gleam. "Do not fear the blade," the priest murmured through the stone mask. "Fear only refusal." Cassian took the knife. Varro's voice echoed through the cavern. "This is a blood oath. Through it, loyalty is tested, not to the gods alone, but to each other." The gladiators formed a wide circle around the stone tables. Veterans stood behind initiates, hands resting lightly on shoulders, backs, forearms. Cassian felt Marcellus's presence solid behind him, steady and unyielding, cut only enough to mark intent. Vero instructed, "Pain is not the offering. Will is." Cassian pressed the blade lightly against his palm. For a moment, hesitation flickered. Not fear, but awareness. This was not punishment. This was choice. He drew the blade across his skin. Blood welled, dark and vivid in the emberlight. It dripped into the shallow bowl before him, spreading slowly across the stone surface. Around him, others did the same. The air filled with the coppery scent of blood mingled with incense and smoke. The chanting rose. The priests moved among them, adding powdered herbs to each bowl. The mixture hissed faintly, releasing a fragrant vapor that coiled upward. Cassian felt lightheaded, not weak, but altered. The cavern seemed to stretch, the walls breathing gently. Vero stepped forward again. "Speak the pact." The initiates recited the words together, their voices weaving into one. "I give blood not as sacrifice, but as bond. I stand with the Brotherhood, in shadow and flame. What watches below witness my will." As the final words left Cassian's mouth, the cavern trembled, not violently, but distinctly. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. The embers flared brighter. Cassian's vision blurred. The stone relief seemed to move, not physically, but perceptually. The carved eyes deepened, shadows pooling within them. Cassian felt a presence press closer, heavier than before. Not singular, but many, layered, ancient, patient. He saw images flicker across his mind unbidden. A battlefield beneath a red sky. Warriors painted in ash and blood, chanting as they charged. A pit carved into the earth, filled with embers. Warriors pressing their bleeding hands into the fire without flinching. Then the Colosseum, newly built, pristine. Gladiators fighting not only for spectacle, but for something unseen, their blood soaking into sand that drank greedily. The visions overlapped, time folding into itself. Cassian gasped softly. Marcellus's hand tightened on his shoulder. "Steady," he murmured. Vero's voice cut through the haze. "The Forbidden Ones accept your pact." The priest lifted the bowls of blood and herbs and poured them slowly into narrow channels carved into the stone floor. The liquid flowed outward, disappearing into cracks and grooves that led deeper into the rock. The chanting softened, becoming almost intimate, breath layered over breath. Lucian whispered hoarsely, "Do you feel that?" Cassian nodded, like something listening. Vero approached the stone relief and placed his blood-marked palm against it. The gesture was mirrored by the priests, then by the veterans. One by one, the initiates were guided forward. When it was Cassian's turn, he stepped toward the relief. Up close, the carvings were immense, towering figures looming above him, their forms rough and ancient. He pressed his bleeding palm against the stone. The surface was warm. A pulse traveled up his arm, not painful but resonant, as though the stone itself answered him. Cassian's breath caught. For an instant, the cavern vanished again. He stood at the edge of a vast chasm. Fire burned far below. Figures stood on the opposite side, tall, indistinct, watching. He could not see their faces clearly, but he felt their attention settle on him like weight. Not hunger, recognition. Then the vision dissolved. Cassian staggered back, heart pounding. Lucian steadied him. The rite continued until all had made contact with the relief. When the last initiate stepped away, Vero raised both arms. "The pact is sealed," he declared. "You are bound not only by brotherhood, but by ancient covenant." The chanting ceased. Silence fell heavy and profound. Vero's gaze swept over the group. Now comes the test. Cassian's stomach tightened. "Loyalty is not proven by words or blood alone," Vero said. "It is proven by choice." The priest retrieved a final object from the shadows, a stone tablet carved with multiple names. Cassian recognized some veterans of the Brotherhood, fighters spoken of in hushed tones. "These are those who broke faith," Vero said. "Those who spoke of the rights above ground. Those who turned their blades against their brothers." The names fell heavy in the air. "You are not asked to punish them," Vero continued. "You are asked to remember." He turned the tablet over. The reverse side was blank. "Place your blood-marked hand upon the stone," Vero instructed, and swear silence. Cashin did so, feeling the cold surface beneath his palm. The initiates spoke together. What lies beneath the sand stays beneath the sand. My breath is sealed. My tongue is bound. As the words faded, Vero nodded once. It is done. The priests extinguished the embers one by one. Darkness crept inward, thick and complete. When the torches finally reignited, the cavern felt altered, emptier somehow, yet heavier with unseen presence. The Brotherhood was dismissed in silence. As Cashin walked back through the ancient tunnels, his senses still tingled. The blood on his palm had dried, leaving his skin tight and marked. Lucian finally spoke. "Do you think they're real?" Cashin did not answer immediately. "Yes," he said at last. "And I don't think it matters whether we believe." Lucian nodded grimly. Behind them, deep within the stone, something shifted. And far above, the Colosseum waited, hungry, unaware, built upon gods Rome had never truly buried. Sleep became unreliable after the blood odes. Cashin no longer trusted it. When it came, it arrived thin and fractured, slipping through his grasp like smoke through clenched fingers. When it did not, the absence felt deliberate, as though something beneath the stone preferred him awake. The others felt it too. Lucian paced the quarters most nights, bare feet silent against the floor, eyes too alert for exhaustion. Some initiates lay rigid on their pallets, staring upward, breath shallow. Others whispered to shadows they pretended not to see. Veterans, seasoned and scarred, bore the chains with practiced restraint, though Cashin noticed how often they rubbed at old marks or touched the sigils on their skin, as if checking they were still real. The arena above demanded blood soon. Everyone knew it, and beneath the Colosseum, something else stirred in anticipation. On the third night after blood odes, Cashin dreamed standing. He was upright, bare feet sinking into sand that felt warm and wet. The roar of the crowd surrounded him, but distorted, stretched as though heard underwater. When he looked down, he saw that the sand was not stained with blood, but with shadow. It clung to his skin, crawling slowly up his legs like living ink. He tried to move. Something breathed behind him. Cashin woke with a sharp inhale, heart hammering. The quarters were dark, but not silent. Somewhere nearby, a man whimpered softly. Another muttered a prayer. Roman hurried, desperate. Cashin sat up. The sigil on his chest ached faintly, pulsing like a second heart. He swung his legs over the pallet and stood. The corridor beyond the quarters was dimly lit, torches low. He was not surprised to find others already awake. Lucian leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes shadowed. "You too?" Lucian asked quietly. Cashin nodded. "Dreams." Lucian's mouth tightened. "They're not dreams." Before Cashin could respond, a figure emerged from the darkness at the far end of the corridor. Vero. He moved without escort, his presence alone enough to command attention. His eyes lingered on the gathered initiates, taking in their exhaustion, their tension. "Good," he said simply. Lucian frowned. "Good." Vero's gaze flicked to him. "You're being prepared." "For what?" Another initiate asked, voice strained. Vero did not answer directly. "Follow." They did. They were led not to the training cavern, nor to the ritual chambers they had come to dread, but to a low, narrow hall carved deep into the bedrock. The ceiling pressed close, the walls rough and unadorned. The air here was cold, smelling of damp stone and old ash. At the end of the hall lay a shallow chamber lit by a single fire pit. Veterans waited there, already stripped and marked with ritual paint. Their expressions were grave, focused. "This is the vigil of unrest," Vero said. "It is observed before your first appearance in the arena." Cashin felt his stomach tighten. "You have given blood. You have sworn silence. Now you will endure." Vero gestured to the floor. "Sit." The initiates obeyed, forming a loose circle around the fire pit. The veterans took positions behind them, close enough that Cashin could feel Marcellus's presence at his back like a steady wall. "The mind breaks before the body," Vero continued. "Rome understands flesh. It does not understand fear shaped by shadow." The fire crackled softly. "You will remain awake until dawn," Vero said. No food, no distraction, only breath and vigilance. Lucian exhaled slowly. And if we fall asleep? Vero's expression did not change. Then the night will find you undefended. The words settled heavily. The vigil began. Time stretched. At first, Cashin focused on the fire, the slow collapse of embers, the shifting shapes of flame. He listened to the breath of those around him, the subtle movements as bodies adjusted against discomfort. Hours passed, or minutes. He could not tell. The chamber seemed to grow larger, then smaller. Shadows thickened at the edges of his vision, gathering like pools of ink. The fire's warmth felt distant, unreachable. That was when he noticed the sound. Not chanting, not breath. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate. Cashin's head snapped up. At the far edge of the chamber, just beyond the firelight, something moved. It was humanoid in shape but wrong in proportion. Too tall, limbs slightly elongated, joints bending where they should not. Cashin's breath caught. The thing did not step into the light. It lingered at the boundary, head tilted, as though studying the room. Lucian whispered, barely audible, "Do you see that?" "Yes," Cashin murmured. A veteran behind them spoke, quietly. "Do not look at it directly." Cashin forced his gaze back to the fire, though every instinct screamed to watch the shadow. The footsteps circled. Another shape appeared, then another. They did not speak. They did not rush. They drifted, slow and patient, feeding on tension rather than fear. Cashin's pulse quickened. Sweat cooled on his skin. "What are they?" Lucian asked, voice tight. Marcellus answered from behind Cashin, his tone calm. "Night beings, or reflections of the mind sharpened by ritual. It makes little difference." Cashin swallowed. One of the shapes leaned closer to the firelight. Cashin caught a glimpse of its face, or the suggestion of one. Hollow eyes, a mouth that opened too wide, though no sound emerged. The fire flared suddenly, sparks leaping. The shape recoiled. "Breathe," Marcellus murmured. Slow, controlled. Cashin obeyed, matching his breath to the rhythm drilled into him during training. Inhale, exhale. The shadows retreated slightly as though displeased. The vigil continued. The night stretched on, thick with presence. Shapes came and went. Sometimes Cashin felt a brush against his shoulder, a whisper of cold air along his neck. He never turned. He never reached out. Lucian trembled once, sharply. Cashin felt his shoulder press briefly against his own, a grounding touch, unspoken reassurance. When dawn finally approached, not visible here, but sensing the subtle shift of air, the fire pit was extinguished. Vero returned. "You have endured," he said. "Some nights will be worse." That was all. They were dismissed to prepare for the arena. The rituals before combat were brief but intense. Cashin and Lucian stood with the others in a narrow antechamber beneath the arena floor. The roar of the crowd above was unmistakable now, a living thunder that pressed down through stone and bone alike. Priests moved among them, painting fresh sigils onto their skin with ash and oil. The scent was sharp, grounding. Veterans stood close, hands resting on shoulders, forearms brushing, breath shared in quiet synchronization. Marcellus leaned close to Cashin's ear. "Remember the night," he said. "Remember how fear moves. Use it." Cashin nodded, pulse racing. A priest pressed his forehead briefly to Cashin's. The contact was fleeting, symbolic, charged. Cashin felt a surge of focus snap through him, cutting through lingering dread. The gate mechanism groaned. Sand shifted beneath his feet as the lift began to rise. The light changed. Cashin emerged into the arena under a wall of sound. Tens of thousands of voices crashed over him, heat and dust and sweat blending into a sensory assault. For a heartbeat, the world tilted. Then training took over. Across the sand stood his opponent, a man broader than Cashin, armored, eyes wild with anticipation. Steel glinted. The signal sounded. They clashed. Cashin's body moved without conscious thought. The roar faded into background noise. All that existed was breath, muscle, distance. His opponent struck hard, fast, but Cashin flowed around the blows, footwork grounded in the shadow techniques Marcellus had drilled into him. A flash of movement at the edge of his vision made his heart lurch. For a split second, he saw one of the night beings standing just beyond the arena wall, watching. Then it was gone. Adrenaline surged. Cashin struck harder, faster. The fight blurred into motion and impact. He felt pain, sharp, distant, but it only sharpened his focus. When his opponent fell, the sand drank deeply. The crowd roared. Cashin stood over the fallen man, chest heaving, sigil burning hot against his skin. He felt exaltation and dread twist together in his gut. He sensed eyes on him, not the crowd's, but something else. Something beneath. The night beings were watching even now. He exited the arena to the Brotherhood's waiting arms. Hands steadied him, guided him, voices low and grounding. Lucian clasped his forearm tightly. You lived. Cashin nodded, breath ragged. So did you. Lucian smiled, a sharp, exhilarated thing edged with fear. Barely. That night, sleep did not come. Cashin lay awake, body humming with residual adrenaline. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw sand turning to shadow, embers breathing, hollow eyes watching. But beneath the fear was something else. Awareness. The arena had not banished the nightmares. It had fed them. And beneath the Colosseum, the shadows learned his name. The discovery began with a mistake. Cashin learned later that most things beneath the Colosseum did. A wrong turn. A door left unguarded. A moment of curiosity allowed to breathe. It happened 3 nights after his first fight. The arena still echoed in his bones. Phantom cheers. The remembered resistance of flesh and armor. The way the sand had clung to his skin as though reluctant to let him go. He had washed, scrubbed until the water ran clear, yet the sense of being marked lingered. Not by blood, by attention. Sleep refused him again. Cashin rose quietly from his pallet, careful not to wake Lucian or the others. The corridors were thick with the smell of sweat and oil, bodies shifting in restless dreams. He slipped into the corridor, guided by torchlight and instinct rather than destination. He told himself he was only walking, letting the tension bleed out of his muscles. But the shadows had learned him. He took a passage he did not recognize. Narrower than most, sloping downward at a subtle angle. The stone here was older, the torch sconces fewer and farther between. The air cooled noticeably, carrying a scent Cashin had not encountered before, dry dust and something faintly sweet, like old resin trapped in stone. The corridor ended at a sealed archway. At first glance, it appeared no different from dozens of others. Stone blocks fitted tightly, a simple iron handle set low. But the markings around it were wrong. Older, deeper. The symbols carved into stone were nearly worn away, yet their shapes stirred unease in Cashin's chest. He hesitated. The sigil on his chest warmed faintly, as if responding. Cashin placed his hand on the handle. It turned easily. The door opened without sound. The chamber beyond was vast and utterly still. Cashin stepped inside. The door closed behind it with a soft, final click. The air within was dry and unmoving, preserved like a sealed tomb. No torches burned here. Instead, a low, ambient glow emanated from veins of mineral embedded in the walls, casting the space in a dull, amber haze. The Forbidden Chamber. He did not know the name then, only that he had crossed into something profoundly old. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with murals. Cashin stood transfixed. They depicted gladiators, unmistakable in their armor and bearing, but altered in ways that unsettled him. Their bodies were painted in spirals and sigils far more elaborate than any used by the current Brotherhood. Some figures knelt in circles, hands joined. Others stood before towering shapes carved from shadow and flame. No crowds, no emperors, only rites. The imagery grew darker as Cashin moved deeper into the chamber. He saw murals of warriors standing barefoot over glowing embers, palms extended, blood dripping into carved channels. Others showed fighters marked head to toe, faces obscured, their bodies arranged in ritual formations that suggested both unity and surrender. One mural stopped him cold. It depicted a circle of gladiators surrounding a single kneeling figure. Their hands were extended toward him, not in violence, but in convergence. Above them loomed a vast, indistinct shape, Neither beast nor god as Rome understood it, but something vast and patient, carved with deliberate ambiguity. Cassian felt his breath slow. There was no graphic cruelty depicted, no excess, and yet the implication was unmistakable. These rites went deeper than endurance, deeper than blood. They had once asked something more intimate. A voice echoed behind him. You weren't meant to find this. Cassian turned sharply. Lucian stood in the doorway, his expression tight, but not shocked. Behind him, two others hovered in the corridor. Initiates Cassian recognized, both pale, eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. You followed me, Cassian said quietly. Lucian nodded. You weren't subtle. One of the others swallowed. What is this place? Cassian gestured helplessly. I don't know, but it's old. Lucian stepped inside, gaze drawn immediately to the murals. He moved slowly, reverently, as though afraid the chamber might notice sudden motion. This isn't like the other ritual halls, Lucian murmured. This feels sealed. Hidden, Cassian said. For a reason. They explored in silence for a time. The murals told a story, not in sequence, but in fragments. Cassian pieced it together gradually. A lineage older than Rome's games, gladiators who were not merely fighters but vessels, intermediaries between the physical arena and something beneath it. The rites had once been deeper, more consuming. A sound broke the stillness. Footsteps, measured, heavy. Cassian turned just as Marcellus entered the chamber. For a heartbeat, none of them spoke. Marcellus's eyes swept the murals, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. When he finally looked at Cassian, there was no anger in his gaze, only something like resignation. So, Marcellus said quietly, you found it. Lucian stared at him. You knew. Yes, Marcellus replied. Most veterans do. Why isn't it used? One of the other initiates demanded, voice trembling. Why hide this? Marcellus exhaled slowly. Because some doors, once opened, do not close again. He stepped fully into the chamber, resting a hand briefly against the wall, fingers tracing a faded symbol. These are the first rites, from before Rome shaped the games into spectacle. Cassian swallowed. They go further than what we practice now. Marcellus met his gaze. Yes. Lucian frowned. Further how? Marcellus did not answer immediately. His silence was heavy. They blurred the boundary too completely, he said at last, between self and shadow, between man and witness. Cassian felt a chill. And that was dangerous? Marcellus's mouth curved into a humorless smile. It was powerful. The distinction mattered. Another voice spoke from the doorway, and power is never free. Varro entered the chamber. The air shifted instantly. Cassian felt it, a tightening, a subtle pressure, as though the chamber itself responded to the elder's presence. Varro's gaze lingered on the initiates, then on the murals, his expression unreadable. I wondered how long it would take, Varro said. Lucian straightened. Why keep this from us? Varro's eyes narrowed slightly. Because not all knowledge strengthens. Some divides. Cassian stepped forward before he could reconsider. These rites, were they abandoned because Rome forbade them? Varro studied him. Rome never knew of them. Then why? Cassian pressed. A long silence followed. Finally, Varro spoke. Because the Brotherhood nearly destroyed itself. The words echoed. These rites demanded absolute surrender. Varro continued. Not to Rome. Not even to the gods beneath the sand, but to the Brotherhood itself. He gestured toward a mural, depicting a tightly bound circle of gladiators. They believed unity required erasure of the individual. Lucian's voice was sharp. And did it work? Varro's gaze hardened. For a time, Marcellus added quietly, until disagreements became schisms, until loyalty became coercion. The initiates exchanged uneasy glances. One faction believed the old rites were the truest path, Varro said. Another believed they went too far, that survival required restraint. Cassian felt the weight of the words settle. And which side won? Varro's eyes flicked to the sealed walls. The side that survived. Lucian stared at the mural, of the kneeling figure. But something was lost. Vero did not deny it. The chamber seemed to breathe around them. One of the initiates spoke hesitantly. Do the Forbidden Ones still expect this? Marcellus answered. They remember it. Cassian felt a familiar sensation of being watched intensify, subtle but undeniable. The sigil on his chest warmed. Lucian turned to Vero. Then why keep this place at all? Vero's voice dropped. Because forgetting invites repetition. Because some among the Brotherhood still believe the old rites are necessary. Cassian's pulse quickened. And are they? Vero met his gaze squarely. That, he said, is the fracture forming even now. The words settled heavily. A distant rumble echoed faintly through the stone. The machinery of the arena, perhaps, or something deeper shifting. Vero straightened. You will leave this place, he said, and you will not speak of it openly. Lucian's jaw tightened. And if we believe it should be restored? Marcellus shot him a warning glance. Vero regarded Lucian calmly. Then you will find others who agree with you. Quietly. The implication was clear. As they turned to leave, Cassian took one last look at the murals. The figures seemed almost to watch him now, their carved forms heavy with intent. The forbidden chamber closed behind them. The days that followed were tense. Cassian felt in the training halls, in the way veterans spoke in lowered voices, in the subtle shifts of alliance. Some whispered reverently of the old rites, of lost unity and deeper power. Others warned of madness, of brothers turned against brothers. Lucian was restless, thoughtful. If they went too far, he said one night, how do we know we aren't already on that path? Cassian had no answer. Marcellus grew quieter, more watchful. Vero convened private meetings with veterans, their discussions sealed behind guarded doors. The Brotherhood, once unified by shared ritual and survival, now carried a fault line beneath its foundation. And beneath it all, Cassian sensed the witnesses waiting. Patient, ancient, uninterested in restraint. The Forbidden Chamber had not merely revealed the past. It had reopened a question the Brotherhood had never truly resolved. How much of oneself could be given away? Before nothing remained but shadow? The prophecy did not arrive with thunder. It surfaced the way rot does beneath marble. Quietly, inevitably, carried on whispers no one could trace to a single mouth. Cassian first heard it spoken in fragments. A phrase murmured during training, a pause in conversation when he entered a room, a look held a second too long by eyes that measured more than muscle and scar. The old fire walks again. The witness has a name. He bears a mark as they did. At first, Cassian dismissed it as rumor, another story born of exhaustion, blood loss, and the constant pressure of the arena. Gladiators clung to meaning where they could. Fate was easier to endure than randomness. But the whispers did not fade. They sharpened. The sigil on Cassian's chest changed. It was subtle, easily missed by anyone not looking for it. The lines darkened, deepening in hue, as though ink had been fed fresh blood. At times, it warmed beneath the skin without warning, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. During training, Cassian found his balance preternaturally precise, his reactions half a breath faster than before. Marcellus noticed. He said nothing at first. He watched. During a sparring session in the lower hall, Cassian disarmed a veteran twice his size without conscious effort, movements flowing in a pattern he did not recognize, but his body seemed to remember. The watching crowd fell silent, not impressed, but unsettled. That night, Marcellus approached him privately. Tell me, Marcellus said, voice low, what do you dream? Cassian hesitated. You know already. Marcellus's jaw tightened. I know what I see. I want to know what you feel. Cassian exhaled slowly. Fire, he said, and sand, and a sense of being awaited. Marcellus closed his eyes briefly. It has begun, he said. The Brotherhood convened in secrecy 2 nights later. Not all were invited. Cassian was. The gathering took place in a chamber Cassian had never seen before. Circular, low-ceilinged, its walls etched with overlapping sigils from multiple eras. The air thrummed with restrained energy, incense thick enough to taste. Veterans stood in clusters, their expressions guarded. Vero presided at the center, staff resting lightly against the stone floor. Lucian stood beside Cassian, tense. This council is not sanctioned by Rome, Varro began, nor would it survive Roman scrutiny. A ripple of restrained approval moved through the room. What is discussed here, Varro continued, will shape the fate of the Brotherhood, and perhaps the arena itself. Cassian felt the weight of dozens of gazes settle on him. Varro gestured. Bring forth the testament. A priest stepped forward, carrying a stone tablet wrapped in cloth. When the fabric was removed, Cassian saw carvings far older than those in the Forbidden Chamber. The symbols were deeply incised, their edges worn smooth by centuries of handling. This is the testament of ash, Varro said, recovered from a pre-Roman shrine beneath what is now the southern quarter. He traced a symbol with his finger. It speaks of cycles, of war spirits bound in mortal vessels. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Lucian leaned close to Cassian, whispering, "This is madness." Varro's voice cut through the tension. It speaks of one who carries the mark unbroken, one who does not merely fight, but awakens. Cassian's pulse thundered. Varro lifted his gaze and met Cassian's eyes. "The signs align," he said calmly. "The sigils change. The visions, the attention of the witnesses." Cassian forced himself to speak. "You're saying I am this vessel." Varro tilted his head slightly. "We are saying the Brotherhood believes you may be." The distinction felt thin. Voices rose immediately. "This is heresy," one veteran snapped. "We abandoned this thinking for a reason. And yet we endure less with each generation," another countered. "Rome tightens its grip. The games grow bloodier. We are consumed faster." Lucian stepped forward. "You're talking about using him." A heavy silence fell. Varro did not deny it. "All vessels are used," he said evenly. "The question is whether they choose." Cassian felt the room closing in, not physically, but psychologically. He thought of the Forbidden Chamber, of murals depicting unity, so complete it erased individuality. He thought of the night beings, patient and watchful. What would this ritual do? Cassian asked. Varro considered him. "Awaken what sleeps. Bind it fully to the Brotherhood, rather than letting it act through fragmented signs." "And the cost?" Cassian pressed. Marcellus answered quietly. "No one knows. Not fully." The admission rippled unease through the room. Another elder spoke. "Rome has begun to notice anomalies." That shifted the focus. "What kind of anomalies?" Varro asked. "Unusual outcomes in the arena," the elder replied. "Fights ending too decisively. Patterns the Lanisti cannot explain." The prefect's agents have begun asking questions. Cassian's stomach tightened. "They suspect sorcery?" Lucian asked. "They suspect unrest," the elder said. "And Rome does not tolerate unrest within its spectacles." Varro nodded, "which means time is short." The implication was clear. The ritual, whatever it entailed, could not wait. Cassian felt a hand brush his forearm. "Lucian," a grounding touch, restrained but urgent. "This isn't destiny," Lucian murmured. "It's pressure dressed as prophecy." Cassian met his gaze. "And if they're right?" Lucian's jaw clenched. "Then they're asking you to stop being yourself." The council dissolved without consensus, but the fracture widened. Over the following days, Cassian felt it keenly. Some veterans watched him with reverence bordering on fear. Others avoided him entirely. Training grew harsher, more focused. Priests marked Cassian with additional sigils, each added with ritual care and whispered invocations. At night, the dreams intensified. Cassian dreamed of standing at the heart of the arena while the crowd fell silent. Shadows poured from beneath the sand, coiling around his legs, his torso, his throat, not constricting, but claiming. He felt power surge through him, vast and intoxicating, braided with loss so profound it hollowed his chest. He woke gasping, sweat-soaked, sigil blazing hot. Lucian was there, gripping his shoulder. "You were burning," he said. "Not fire. Something else." Cassian sat up slowly. "They're closer." Lucian nodded grimly. "So is Rome." The tension reached a breaking point when Roman officials arrived unannounced. The prefect himself descended into the underlevels, flanked by guards whose armor gleamed even in the torchlight. His presence sent a ripple of unease through the Brotherhood. Rome did not descend lightly. Cassian watched in the shadows as Vero received the prefect with measured respect. There have been reports, the prefect said coolly, of irregularities, unusual resilience, unpredictable outcomes. Vero inclined his head. Gladiators are not machines. The prefect smiled thinly. They are investments. His gaze drifted briefly but pointedly toward Cassian's hiding place. Cassian felt like a blade sliding between ribs. We will be observing more closely, the prefect said, for the good of Rome. When they departed, the Brotherhood was silent. They suspect, Lucian whispered later. They always do. Marcellus found Cassian that evening. The council has decided, he said. Cassian did not ask which way. They will proceed, Marcellus continued. Those who oppose it will not interfere. Cassian exhaled slowly. And you? Marcellus met his gaze, eyes heavy. I will stand with you. The ritual was set for the next lunar turning. Preparation was intense, relentless. Cassian was isolated from most of the Brotherhood, guarded not as a prisoner, but as something precious and volatile. Priests guided him through meditative rites, breath control, trance induction. Each session brought him closer to the edge of himself. He felt watched constantly, not just by men, but by the witnesses beneath the sand. Their presence pressed closer, more insistent. On the eve of the ritual, Lucian was allowed to see him. They sat together in silence for a long time. You don't have to do this, Lucian said finally. Cassian smiled faintly. If I walk away, someone else will be chosen, or they'll tear the Brotherhood apart trying. Lucian's voice broke. And if you lose yourself? Cassian reached out, clasping Lucian's forearm. The contact was steady, grounding, intimate without words. Then remember me, Cassian said, as I was. Lucian swallowed hard. I will. As they parted, Cassian felt the weight of choice settle fully upon him. Destiny was a story others told. This was something else. Below the Colosseum, ancient forces stirred, recognizing patterns long denied. Rome tightened its grip above. The Brotherhood stood on the edge of transformation or collapse. And Cassian, marked and watched, stood at the center of it all. The war spirit did not sleep. It waited. The day of the great games arrived wrapped in heat and expectation. From before dawn, Rome stirred. Streets filled with processions, banners snapped in the air, vendors shouted themselves hoarse. The Colosseum loomed at the heart of it all, stone colossal and patient, its arches swallowing crowds by the tens of thousands. Above ground, the city celebrated spectacle. Below it, the Brotherhood prepared for revelation. Cassian felt the change in the stone long before the roar began. The underlevels vibrated with distant movement. Footsteps, machinery, the shifting weight of Rome's appetite. Torches burned brighter than usual, their flames restless, as though the air itself resisted stillness. Priests moved quickly through the corridors, murmuring invocations under their breath. Hands stained with ash and oil. Cassian stood alone in a narrow chamber carved directly beneath the arena's central pit. The sand above him waited, still, unbroken, hiding what it always hid. He had been stripped of armor. Instead, his body bore layered markings drawn from multiple rites, sigils of endurance, of binding, of witness. They overlapped and intertwined, forming patterns that felt less like decoration and more like language pressed into flesh. The sigil on his chest pulsed steadily now, warm and insistent. He closed his eyes. Breath in, breath out. The world narrowed. Footsteps approached. Vero entered first, followed by Marcellus and Lucian. Behind them came the priests, masked silent, carrying ritual objects wrapped in dark cloth. Lucian's eyes searched Cassian's face. Are you ready? Cassian considered the question. Ready implied preparation. Acceptance. I am here, he said. Lucian nodded, jaw tight. Vero regarded Cassian steadily. What happens next cannot be undone. Cassian met his gaze. I know. Vero inclined his head once. Then we proceed. They moved. The ritual path wound through passages closed to all but the Brotherhood. Stone doors opened at Vero's touch, mechanisms grinding softly as ancient locks disengaged. The deeper they went, the more the air thickened, heavy with incense and mineral dust. They reached the chamber beneath the arena's heart. It was circular, vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center lay a raised stone platform carved with concentric rings of symbols, the convergence of all the rites Cassian had witnessed thus far. Channels etched into floor radiated outward, empty now, waiting. Above them, the roar of the crowd began in earnest. Cassian felt it wash through him, not a sound but as pressure, an immense living force pressing down, eager and blind. The priests took their positions around the chamber, forming a wide ring. Veterans stood behind them, faces grave. Lucian remained at Cassian's side, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Vero stepped onto the platform. "Today," he said, voice carrying despite the thunder overhead, "Rome celebrates blood." A murmur of agreement moved through the Brotherhood. "Today," Vero continued, "the Brotherhood decides what that blood awakens." The chanting began. It was deeper than any before, layered and resonant, voices weaving into a rhythm that seemed to vibrate through bone. Cassian felt it settle into his chest, syncing with his heartbeat. The priests unveiled the ritual objects, a bowl of dark liquid that reflected no light, a blade of blackened metal etched with pre-Roman symbols, cords woven with metallic thread. Vero gestured to Cassian. Cassian stepped onto the platform. The stone was warm beneath his feet. Lucian's hand brushed his forearm briefly, a restrained, grounding contact, before he stepped back into the circle. Vero raised the blade. "This is the rite of convergence," he intoned. "It binds what watches to what stands." Cassian did not look away. Vero drew the blade across Cassian's palm, precise, controlled. Blood welled, dark and vivid, dripping into the carved channels at Cassian's feet. The liquid flowed outward, tracing the symbols, filling grooves that had waited centuries for renewal. The chanting intensified. Cassian's vision blurred at the edges. Vero spoke again, voice steady. "Do you accept what comes?" Cassian inhaled slowly. "I accept," he said. The words left him heavier than he expected. The priests added the dark liquid from the bowl to the channels. It mixed with Cassian's blood, thickening, releasing a scent both sharp and strangely sweet. The stone beneath his feet thrummed faintly. Above them, the crowd roared louder as the first combatants emerged into the arena. Cassian felt it, felt the arena awaken. The sand above began to shift. Not physically, not yet, but perceptually, as though the boundary between above and below thinned. Cassian sensed the presence he had known in dreams pressing closer, no longer content to watch from the edges. Shadows pooled at the far edges of the chamber. The night beings emerged. They did not cross into the light fully. They lingered just beyond it, tall and indistinct, their forms rippling like heat haze. Cassian felt their attention settle on him with unmistakable focus. Vero's voice did not falter. "Witnesses of old," he called. "The vessel stands." The shadows stirred. Cassian's chest burned. Images flooded his mind, not as visions this time, but as memories that were not his. A battlefield beneath the sky, choked with smoke. Warriors screaming not in fear, but in unity. Blood slicking the ground. Steam rising where it touched heated stone. He felt strength surge through him, raw, immense, intoxicating. It was not rage. It was purpose sharpened to a blade. The chanting shifted. Cassian's body moved without conscious command, muscles tightening, posture changing subtly as though aligning with an internal pattern long dormant. His breathing deepened, steadied, resonant. Lucian watched, fists clenched at his sides. "Hold," Marcellus murmured, voice strained but controlled. "Hold yourself." Cassian heard him, felt him, but the world narrowed further. The shadows leaned closer. The war spirit, if that was what was, pressed against him, not as an invader, but as a mirror. Cassian felt its weight, its hunger for manifestation. It did not seek domination. It sought expression. Cassian's knees bent slightly as power surged through his limbs. The sigils on his skin glowed faintly, lines sharpening, aligning. Heat radiated from him, not scorching, but undeniable. Above, the roar of the crowd spiked as blood was spilled. The arena responded. Sand began to pour through fine cracks in the chamber ceiling, drifting down like pale rain. Each grain glimmered briefly as it passed through the ritual light. Vero's eyes widened, not in fear, but in awe. It recognizes him. One priest whispered. Lucian shook his head. This is too much. Cashin's vision split, above and below simultaneously. He saw the arena as if standing within it, felt the sand beneath his feet, heard the crowd chant his name though he had not yet emerged. And beneath it all, he felt the war spirit coil, ready. Cashin clenched his bloodied hand. No, he said, aloud this time. The chanting faltered. Vero's gaze snapped to him. Cashin, I am not a door, Cashin said, voice resonant with something not entirely his own. I am not empty. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if surprised. Cashin felt the war spirit press harder, testing resistance. Power surged, threatening to overwhelm. For a heartbeat, he wavered. Felt the seductive ease of surrender, the simplicity of letting something vast take the weight of choice. Lucian stepped forward. Cashin! The sound of his voice cut through the surge. Cashin anchored himself to it, to memory, to self. He breathed. He focused. I will stand with you, Cashin said, not to the Brotherhood, not to Rome, but to the presence itself. Not beneath you. Silence fell. The shadows stilled. Then, slowly, they shifted. The pressure eased, transforming rather than retreating. Cashin felt the power settle, not consuming, but contained, integrated. The sigils dimmed to a steady glow. Vero exhaled sharply. He has bound it. Marcella stared. By will alone. The chanting resumed, different now. Slower. Reverent. Cashin stood taller, his posture unmistakably changed. He felt altered, not possessed, but expanded. The war spirit's presence remained, coiled within, watchful but restrained. Above them, a trumpet sounded, the signal for the next combat. Vero gestured sharply. To the arena, the lift rose. Cashin ascended into light and sound. The Colosseum erupted as he emerged. The crowds roared crashing over him like a wave. He felt it now, felt the arena's hunger, its ancient alignment with blood and witness. He stepped onto the sand. Opponents awaited him. Two, armored, wary. The signals sounded. Cashin moved. He did not fight like before. There was no hesitation, no excess. His movements were precise, efficient, devastating in their clarity. He felt every shift of weight, every opening, as though the arena itself guided him. The crowd went mad. Cashin struck, disarmed, disabled, and in the fight decisively without prolongation. Sand darkened beneath fallen bodies. The roar became thunderous. Cashin stood at the center of it, chest rising and falling steadily. He felt the war spirit stir in approval, not bloodlust, but recognition. Beneath the sand, the shadows withdrew, satisfied, for now. Cashin left the arena amid chaos, guided by the Brotherhood hands. Lucian grabbed him, breathless. You're still you. Cashin met his gaze, eyes bright with something fierce and grounded. Yes. Above, Rome celebrated, unaware of what had shifted. Below, the Brotherhood understood. The ritual had not ended as planned. It had revealed something far more dangerous. Choice. After the great games, Rome slept poorly. The city celebrated with the fervor of a beast fed too well. Wine flowing, songs echoing through streets still warm with the day's heat. Victories were praised, wagers settled, names shouted until they lost meaning. Yet beneath the noise lay a current of unease no revel could drown. Something had shifted. Cashin felt it most keenly in the silence that followed triumph. In the hours after his final bout, he was not returned immediately to the quarters. Instead, he was led downward once more, deeper than before, through corridors that no longer felt merely hidden but expectant. The war spirit within him was quiet now. Not gone. Contained. It coiled in the center of his being like a dormant flame, neither urging nor resisting. It waited. Lucian walked beside him, watchful, hand never far from Cashin's arm. Marcellus followed, his presence steady but heavy with thought. The priests move ahead in solemn procession. Masks change yet again. Simple this time, carved from pale stone, their features worn smooth by age. They came to the deepest chamber. It was not the forbidden chamber, nor the place of convergence beneath the arena's heart. This space was older still, untouched by murals, unmarked by sigils. The stone here was bare, as though deliberately left unclaimed. At its center stood a single object, a low stone altar, unadorned, its surface polished by centuries of hands. Vero waited there. He looked older than Cashin remembered, not weakened, but stripped of ceremony, as though the night had peeled away the layers of authority he wore so easily. This is where it ends, Vero said quietly. Lucian tensed. Ends how? Vero's gaze moved between them. That depends on what is chosen. Cashin stepped forward. You said the ritual beneath the arena was the most dangerous. Vero inclined his head. This is the most final. The priests formed a wide circle around the chamber's edge, not chanting, not moving. They watched. The Brotherhood was born here, Vero said, resting a hand briefly on the altar. Before Rome, before the games were spectacle, warriors gathered not to entertain, but to bind themselves to something larger. Cashin felt the war spirit stir, faintly, attentive. They believed power flowed from unity. Vero continued, from surrendering the self to the whole. Marcella spoke quietly, and it nearly destroyed them. Yes, Vero agreed, and yet it endured. Lucian shook his head. You're still trying to decide whether to finish what they began. Vero met his gaze without flinching. We are deciding whether the Brotherhood survives at all. The weight of that settled heavily. Cashin looked at the altar. What is required? Vero's voice softened. The last rite is not about awakening. It is about release. Silence stretched. Release of what? Cashin asked. Vero did not answer immediately. When he did, his words were careful, of the bond between the Brotherhood and the witnesses beneath the sand. Lucian inhaled sharply. You mean to sever it? Yes, Vero said, or to surrender fully to it. The chamber seemed to grow colder. Marcellus's jaw tightened. There is no middle path. Vero's gaze returned to Cashin. There was once. You forged it. Cashin felt the truth of that resonate. The ritual beneath the arena had not gone as planned. Not because it failed, but because it changed. The war spirit had not consumed him. It had recognized resistance as structure. What does Rome want? Cashin asked. Vero smiled faintly. Rome wants control. It always has. As if summoned by the words, a distant echo reverberated through the stone. Booted footsteps, metallic and disciplined. Cashin felt the shift instantly. They're here, Lucian whispered. Roman authority did not descend quietly. The prefect emerged from the corridor with a contingent of guards, armor gleaming even in the low light. His expression was calm, composed. Too calm. So, the prefect said, surveying the chamber, this is where you hide your secrets. Vero did not bow. You trespass. The prefect chuckled softly. You exist at Rome's pleasure. His gaze settled on Cashin, sharp and appraising. And you are the anomaly. Cashin met his eyes steadily. I am a gladiator. For now, the prefect replied. But you have drawn attention. Unwanted attention. He gestured, and the guard spread slightly, hands resting on hilts. We know something moves beneath this place, the prefect continued. We do not care what it is. We care that it is not ours. Vero's voice was low. Some things cannot be owned. The prefect's smile vanished. Everything can. The war spirit stirred more strongly now, responding not with hunger, but with recognition of threat. Cashin felt its power press upward, restrained by his will. Lucian leaned close. If they force this. I know, Cashin murmured. The prefect stepped closer to the altar. And this nonsense, he said. Disband your cult. Hand over the marked one. Rome will be merciful. The word rang hollow. Vero laughed softly. Mercy is not Rome's virtue. He turned to Cashin. The choice is now. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Cashin stepped toward the altar. Every eye followed him, Brotherhood and Rome alike. What happens if we sever the bond? Cashin asked. Vero answered honestly. The witnesses withdraw. The rites lose their power. The Brotherhood becomes what Rome believes it already is, fighters, nothing more. And if we surrender fully? Cashin asked. Marcellus spoke this time. Then the witnesses act through us without restraint. Rome will not survive unchanged. Lucian's voice was tight. Neither will you. Cashin placed his hands on the altar. The stone was cool, grounding. He closed his eyes. He felt the war spirit clearly now, not as an invader, not as a master, but as an ancient pattern of violence and survival, bound to blood and witness. It did not demand. It offered. Cashin understood then what the last rite truly was. Not surrender, not severance, integration or erasure. He opened his eyes. I will not give you Rome, Cashin said softly. The prefect stiffened. You presume. I will not give you the Brotherhood, Cashin continued. Vero's breath caught. And I will not give myself away, Cashin finished. The chamber trembled, not violently, but profoundly, as though the stone itself acknowledged a boundary drawn. Cashin pressed his blood-marked palm to the altar. The sigils on his skin ignited briefly, lines flaring then settling into a steady glow. He felt the war spirit surge once more, then fold inward, its vastness compressing, condensing. The witnesses stirred. Shadows gathered at the chamber's edges, not advancing, not retreating, watching. Cashin spoke, not in Latin, not in any tongue Rome recognized, but in the language of ritual shaped by breath and intent. I stand between, he declared. What was bound is bound anew within. The altar cracked. A fissure split its surface, light bleeding through. Not fire, not darkness, but something neutral and deep. The shadows recoiled sharply. A sound echoed through the depths. Not a scream, not a roar, but a vast exhalation, as though something ancient had released a long-held breath. The witnesses withdrew. The pressure lifted. The chamber stilled. Cashin sagged slightly, Lucian and Marcellus catching him before he fell. The war spirit settled fully now, no longer coiled to strike, but dormant, contained beyond easy reach. Vero stared at the cracked altar, awe and grief warring in his expression. You have ended it. Cashin shook his head faintly. I have changed it. The prefect recovered quickly. Seize him, he snapped. The guards surged forward. They did not reach Cashin. The stone floor split between them, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to halt momentum, to introduce uncertainty. Dust filled the air. The guards hesitated. The prefect stepped back, eyes narrowed. What have you done? Cashin straightened slowly, supported but standing. His voice carried, steady and calm. You will leave. The prefect laughed brittle. Or what? Cashin met his gaze. Or Rome will learn, he said, that not all power announces itself. The prefect searched Cashin's face, then the chamber, the cracked altar, the unmoving priests. He made a calculation. This is not finished, the prefect said coldly. No, Cashin agreed. It never is. The Roman contingent withdrew, boots echoing sharply against stone. The sound faded, leaving behind a silence that felt earned. The Brotherhood remained still for a long moment. Then Vero bowed his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The rites are revealed, he said quietly, and ended as they were never meant to be. Lucian let out a shaky breath. What happens now? Cashin looked around the chamber, at the priests, the veterans, the bare stone walls. Now, he said, we remember without repeating. Marcellus studied him. And the war spirit? Cashin placed a hand over his chest. It sleeps, as it should. Above them, Rome continued, unaware of how close it had come to transformation. Below, the Brotherhood dispersed slowly, changed in ways none could yet name. In the days that followed, the games continued, but something was different. Fighters fought as they always had, yet the air beneath the arena felt quieter, less crowded with unseen attention. The forbidden chamber sealed itself. The witnesses did not return. Cashin remained a gladiator, though rumors clung to him like shadow. Some called him chosen. Others called him cursed. Rome watched him carefully. He watched himself even more so. At night, When sleep came, his dreams were no longer filled with fire and shadow, but with stone and breath and the steady weight of restraint. The truth of the taboo rituals was not erased. It was contained. And whether that containment would hold, whether the ancient powers would remain dormant, or simply wait for another name, another age, no one could say. Beneath the sand, something listened, and the world above turned on, unchanged, or so it believed.